welcome back to another edition of Church and State with Chris Ferrara and Brian McCall. Welcome, Chris. Good to see you.
Good to be back. A little hectic lately, but I'm glad for the respite here.
Well, I don't know how much respite there'll be with some of the things we have to talk about. It might get you agitated.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm in a constant state of agitation, so what difference does it make?
Right. Well, first off, we're going to talk about an event that occurred this past weekend. The occupant of the Oval Office, the president in name only, Joe Biden, went to Europe.
No, come on, Brian. Now, you won 81 million votes. It's not like they had dumps of hundreds, thousands of ballots in the middle of the night or anything.
No, of course not. Of course not. Not
clearly,
at all.
Clearly, the election was free of any taint of illegality.
Of course, absolutely. Well, he was in Europe promoting his socialist agenda in Scotland, essentially promoting his, bioterrorism, essentially. And on the way, he stopped off in Rome to meet Pope Francis. So you think maybe he would have met him to, tell him, hey, you've got to get in line with Church Magisterium, stop promoting abortion. But no. They had a real chummy meeting, it sounds like. We don't really know because unlike other meetings, they didn't let the press there. They just released pictures. But you can see, and there's a whole lot of them, all big smiles.
Look at the hand on the chest of the Pope there. Oh, he's so touched. He's so touched.
Yes, so touched.
It really promotes mass murder.
I'm sure it looks like he's admonishing him. It looks like it there. He's really giving him a telling off, right?
Certainly.
Yes. But then what happens? So Pope Francis meets in this private closed-door session, no press allowed, meets with him. Biden comes out and he gets asked questions. He said, what'd you talk about? The poor. We'll get to that in a second. Climate change, the pandemic. And so, well, did he ask you about abortion? Didn't come up. Just didn't come up. In fact, he told me I'm a good Catholic and I should keep receiving communion.
Of course he
did. What would church law really say about Joe Biden receiving communion?
Well, he's incapable of receiving communion because he has put himself outside the church, I would argue, by materially assisting in abortion, although some would argue that you actually have to participate in a particular abortion by driving someone to the abortion clinic or paying for it. But as far as I'm concerned, no one can be considered a legitimately practicing Catholic who promotes the mass murder of children in the womb up to the moment of birth, even as the head is exiting the birth canal, for heaven's sake. So to suggest that this man is a Catholic in good standing is disgusting, appalling, impossible.
Well, and again, he's just recently, forget his 40 years, but recently signed an executive order saying government funding should pay for an abortion. So, I mean, he's now saying we'll pay for an abortion. But anyway, he comes out, he announces this. Pope says, keep going to communion. Really a direct slap at several bishops in the United States. Bishop Cordileone, who has talked about bishops denying communion to politicians who advocate killing of children in the womb. A slap at Bishop Strickland, who has said similar things. But again, now we get this sort of phenomenon with this papacy. So they run to the Vatican. Joe Biden says this is what the Pope said. And the Vatican press office says, we can neither confirm nor deny what the Pope said to him. What message does that send?
In other words, he said it, but let's remember what he said in an earlier press interview before he met Biden. I think it was about a month ago. He was asked about this question of politicians who promote abortion receiving Holy Communion. And he said something along the lines of abortion is murder, which he says from time to time to preserve some measure of credibility. But then he said, but that is the teaching in the abstract. In the pastoral realm, we must deal with these situations concretely as sensitive and caring pastors. The implication being that the abstract teaching is one thing, but dealing with politicians who approach the communion rail is another, so they should just be allowed to receive communion in the pastoral realm while we uphold the abstract teaching, which of course destroys morality in practice because it reduces moral precepts to mere propositions, possibly achievable, but not necessarily achievable. And let's remember that this is the same Pope who said, do we observe the commandments? Yes, but not as absolutes. So he's basically spent the last, what is it now? We're on 7 years with him, 7.5 years.
Feels like 20.
Yeah. He spent the last 7.5 to 8 years undermining the entire moral order by reducing the natural law to benchmarks for personal improvement. And this is consistent with his entire pontificate, what he said to Biden behind closed doors. And if they won't confirm or deny, that's an admission, obviously, because it's not something that they would not hesitate to deny if, in fact, he had told Biden anything along the lines of Catholic teaching in this matter.
And again, this is not the first time he's done this. Pope
No.
Francis met with Scarfali, a less than, I would say, reputable Italian journalist, has long, hour-long interview with him, which Scarfali claims he doesn't record and is just reporting from memory. And then he makes, a bunch of statements about what Pope Francis said, which are scandalous like this. And then again, they go to the Vatican. Oh, we can't really say whether that's true or not. So again, this seems to be a technique. He did it with a lady from Argentina who claimed she talked to him on the phone, who was divorced and civilly remarried. He told her to receive communion. Again, so he seems to be, what does our Lord say? Let your yes be yes, your no be no, speak openly. He seems to like speaking privately and then have people report his words.
Well, sure. It's one earth-shaking pronouncement after another on the telephone during an interview with Scalfari and in other venues, followed by the refusal to confirm or deny. That's his technique. He's clearly undermining the fundamentals of Catholic dogma with these private remarks, which then are, of course, predictably publicized to the world, and then he won't deny them. So if he doesn't deny them, as far as I'm concerned, they stand admitted. And I think more and more people are beginning to recognize, as harsh as this sounds, that this Pope is essentially, let's face it, a destroyer of adherence to Catholic doctrine. He's constantly railing against precepts. We mustn't just have a faith based on precepts, as if the precepts and the faith were mutually exclusive, which it's a typical modernist technique. You create false oppositions between the faith and precepts in this case. But the precepts that the church teaches go hand in hand with the faith. And without precepts, what do you have? Some sort of vague religious sentiment welling up from within, which is the modernist version of religion.
Yes. Well, let's talk about that in terms of dogma, because he seems to have substituted basic things like the commandments for a different list of dogmas, which include COVID, everything, whatever is the latest COVID pronouncement, the climate change, sustainable development, inclusive capitalism, and the exaltation of the poor. In a way, I quote you all the time. I think one of your best phrases, he's really into ostentatious humility, right? Showing himself as sort of poor being a virtue in and of itself. And I think there's a comment of his recently that we were talking about earlier that you'd like to share about being poor.
Well, he's constantly saying that the poor are blessed by the mere fact of being poor. Now, let's consider that. Let's unpack it, as the modernists would say. Right. Our Lord's reference in the Beatitudes to the poor occurs twice, as far as I know, and once in the Gospel of Mark, where he enunciates the Beatitudes, and he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," meaning those who are humble. That doesn't exclude necessarily someone who's rich. But then in the Gospel of Mark, he says, "Blessed are ye poor," and he says of the rich, "Woe to you rich, for you have your consolations." Now, the two passages have to be read together. Is he saying that the mere fact of your relative status, and poverty is a relative thing, as a poor person in a given society makes you blessed? Well, what if you're poor because you're some sort of degenerate who has abandoned his wife, has illegitimate children, and in fact goes around envying the rich and maybe a thief? Poverty in itself is not a virtue. It's a state of life. Now, it may come to the condition of humility, and if one is reduced to these circumstances through no fault of his own. But our Lord is clearly speaking of poverty in the spiritual sense, the sense of someone who is humble before God. Now, it is difficult, obviously, for someone who is showered with riches. As our Lord said, it's easy as a camel entering the eye of the needle, as it is for a rich man to get into heaven. That's an admonition to the rich. But that doesn't mean that the poor are, simply by virtue of the fact of being poor, blessed. You have to look at the case of each individual. Why are they poor? What is the reason for their poverty? And poverty, again, is a relative thing. Poverty today means you have a television set, a smartphone, and various other modern conveniences, including electricity and running water. Where is the humility or the blessedness in living in those circumstances, which are purely relatively poor, as opposed to someone who is living in a more affluent way. So it's not so simple as he makes it seem that anyone who is below the federally established poverty level is blessed by that mere fact. It's ridiculous.
Well, it's really a Marxist technique because it's class warfare. So it's taking this one class and saying
Right.
that is essentially what defines you. Your economic status is what defines you because you are poor, and it confers this special moral status on you regardless of how you live your life. But again, that just seems very consistent with a dictator who, again, he's interesting because people say, oh, he was conservative, but he seems to be someone who's willing to use Marxist ideology, his inclusive capitalism initiative, for example, when it suits his purposes.
Well, it is. It's exactly the class warfare of,
Yes.
of Marxist thinking, even
Right.
if he isn't a full blown Marxist and disavows Marxism, as he
Yes.
likes to do, while espousing essentially Marxist concepts such as class
Yes.
warfare. The poor
Yes.
versus the rich are taking everything from the poor. That's a caricature of Catholic social teaching.
Mm.
Catholic social teaching recognizes, as our Lord did, that you will always have the poor with
Or
you.
with you.
Poor
Yes.
you will always have with you, always. And that is, again, a relative phenomenon. So the poor of the world of today would be living like kings compared to the poor of Jerusalem when
Mm.
our Lord walked the streets of that city and preached his
Yes.
gospel.
Yes.
So again, we're dealing with leftist caricatures of Catholic teaching.
Mm.
Now, for someone who likes to talk about nuances, this Pope is curiously devoid of them when it comes to such issues.
Yes, yes. Well, we'll see. Biden has been preaching his socialist agenda for stopping the world from actually having an economy up there in Scotland, uh, but not first without first getting the blessing of the deep church on his way there. But let's move on to our second topic for today, and that's really a phenomenon that's becoming more and more evident. I know you've been talking about this for a long time, but more and more evident to people the last year or two that there are certain rules and laws that are supposed to restrict the government to protect our natural rights and our ability to perform our natural obligations. There are limits on what government can do, but the sort of modern liberal technique seems to be evade those limits by what I call kind of outsourcing government to private corporations. So right now, for example, we have the government is mandating certain quasi medical procedure that we won't really mention to be put into your arm, but making your employer do it. So it's, oh, we're not we're not forcing you to do it. It's a private employer. They're just adopting it. Or censoring against the First Amendment. Well, we'll just have a couple big tech companies and get them to censor you in a way that if it were the government, we wouldn't be able to do it because it'd be against the Constitution. But we'll just outsource it, and they can hide behind that. So part of
Well,
this is okay.
this is the other side of the coin of Catholic social teaching. We've discussed
Yes.
the poor and how you don't exalt the poor, but neither do you exalt wealth. We're anything but hyper capitalists. No one is more critical of the excesses of capitalism than the popes in their social teaching. And here we see the consequence of these multinational hegemons gaining control of social life and economic life in ways that make them quasi governmental entities. So
Hmm.
now the entire realm of public discussion is in the hands of one little dweeb from Harvard who's literally controlling opinion, world opinion, through the censorship of opinions he doesn't like on Facebook, which was one of Trump's biggest sources of dissemination of his message.
Hmm.
So that's one aspect of it, and then of course the delegation to corporations of the process of administering, shall we say, vitamin V.
Vitamin V. Yes.
Since we're not allowed to say this because the quasi-governmental censors will censor you if you use what the word V, what V stands for. So yeah, we have these corporations acting as arms of the government, and there's a theory of state action here, which holds that when these entities, these private entities, become entangled in the enforcement of government policy, they in turn become state actors. This is an area that has to be explored, and where big tech is concerned, these gigantic corporations, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, they have become basically public utilities, and I believe they should be regulated as such. On the one hand, they're saying, well, we're not publishers, so you can't punish us for what we allow to be published on our sites. But on the other hand, they say we can make editorial judgments every day of the week as to what content we will permit. So they are publishers.
Yes.
Now, at the very least, they should be treated, because they have monopolized the public forums. Basically, the internet is the public square now. They should be treated as public utilities and regulated accordingly. Let me give you a concrete example. Would you say that a phone company can prevent conservatives from making phone calls? Obviously not. Neither should these big tech companies deny access to their forums for conservative speech of various kinds. And so the argument for public utility treatment is compelling in my view. Sooner or later, this is going to end up in the Supreme Court.
Well, and they're red herring on that one, as they try to say, oh, well, people can use these forums to commit a crime, right? Well, the same analogy goes to the phone, right? So I could use the phone to, set up a bank robbery with my, cohorts, but you don't actually have the phone company stop you from talking. What you say is you get arrested not for using the phone, but for committing the crime. So
Right.
obviously, if people misuse these public forums and commit a crime, then prosecute them for whatever it might actually be, planning, conspiracy to rob a bank or whatever it is. But again, they always are confusing the issues.
But I'm
But
dealing with these corporations now in the context of resistance to a mandate for the injection of vitamin V into people. And these corporations are relentlessly, ruthlessly destroying careers in the healthcare
yes,
field, in particular, where I'm involved in litigation, firing thousands of people who never needed vaccination before, when they were frontline heroes in the battle against COVID, as the press describes it. But now these heroes, as they say themselves when they protest this, are zeros. Get out of the street. We don't want you anymore, because you won't be injected with a certain substance that is proving more and more to be, first of all, unreliable, and secondly, potentially very harmful. The federal government just came out with a warning that people who take the Johnson & Johnson vaccine are 3.5 times more likely to contract a serious blood clotting disorder. Actually, that was a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA,
yes, yes,
a peer-reviewed published study. 3.5 times more likely to contract a potentially fatal blood clotting disorder, which can result in strokes and other problems.
yes.
And so, as these vaccines wane in their effectiveness, and the effects of them, the adverse effects of them, become more and more obvious, these corporations, in a psychopathic manner, are forcing people to be injected with them on pain of loss of their careers.
Yes, and again, I actually saw something this week that gets to me, shows me the root of the problem. So, a lot of these people they wring their hands and say, "We're just corporations. We're just trying to make money." Well, there's something that shows that they've gone beyond that. That they really can't be treated like just private corporations trying to make money, trying to provide goods and services. Because if that were the case, what would have restrained this behavior before is the profit motive, right? You don't do things like to make yourself less profitable or to alienate your customers, because that hurts profits. But now you can see these corporations don't really care about that the way they used to, and they're willing to sacrifice. So, for example, in your example, get rid of all your workers so you can't actually make money anymore because you want to push a political agenda. Well, something this week showed that to me. It was a commercial put out by a candy company, and you think again, candy. They want to kids get parents to buy for kids. You don't want to alienate them, but what do? They don't just have a commercial saying how great their candy is, but they have a commercial pushing a political agenda. So let's take a quick look at this, because I think it really illustrates how corporations have changed.
I dread it.
Presents Bite Size Halloween.
Hi. I'm your new nanny.
I don't need a nanny.
Well, your parents seem to think you do.
What's your favorite color?
Black.
Other than black.
Oh, charcoal?
Why are you all dressed up? It's not Halloween yet.
Can I help you?
Are you a good witch or a bad witch?
Do you want to find out? You buckled?
I'm still wearing my princess dress.
Do you want to wear it?
Hey, you! Princess! You look like a girl. Why are you wearing that?
Dressing like this makes me feel good.
Is that your nanny? She looks weird. You look weird, your nanny looks weird, you guys are both weird.
No, we're just different.
Boys don't wear dresses.
Whoa!
Whoa! Where is it coming from? What's happening? Ow!
We should go.
Okay, I think enough of that. But
well,
you see the
I
point.
mean, I tell you what, the word diabolical is overused these days. That is an absolutely diabolical little commercial. The penalty for objecting to a boy wearing a dress is death.
Is death, is
That's at the
disintegration.
hands of a demonic character who's
Yes.
portrayed as the hero of the piece.
Exactly. I mean, again, the point here is these commercials used to be cute little, look, make your kids happy, give them sugar, right?
Yeah.
And now it's turned into pushing the occult, murdering people that tease you or make fun of you, and promoting transgenderism, again, which all studies show most Americans are not in favor of. So instead of saying, hey, let's not alienate our buying public, our customers, let's like rub it in their face. And this is not the first commercial like this, but it's one of the most outrageous. It sure shows you that people are willing. I mean, if I were on a board of directors thinking rationally as an economist, I'd say, why would you ever run this commercial? You're going to alienate a bunch of parents who'll say, why would we buy Twix anymore? But clearly that's not what these executives care about now.
No, and they are the determinants of the corporate personality. And now we have, in this book that I wrote about the Church and the Libertarian, we cite an article by one Joel Bakken, a radical liberal to be sure, but liberals have certain valid points when it comes to the evils of capitalism, which the popes have never ceased to condemn. And one of the points that they make is that corporations exhibit the characteristics. One of the points Bakken makes is that corporations exhibit the traits of the psychopath. They're remorseless. They're parasitic. They exploit the suffering of others. They have no empathy, and so on. The checklist of psychopathic traits fits a corporation exactly. And now we have these corporations basically ruthlessly directing social discourse in leftward directions that were unimaginable only a few years ago, as that commercial indicates. They're promoting basically a war against being when it comes to issues like transgenderism. We can't have any distinction between male and female as God created them. So we must attack the very concept of maleness as opposed to the feminine gender in order to eliminate any conception of a created order ordained as such by God. These corporations are engaged in the social engineering operation designed to extirpate any sense in people that there's something more to their lives than this world and Twix during Halloween.
Right. Well, there you have it. Our view on what's been happening in church and state. Biden meeting Pope Francis, and I'm sure he'll come back emboldened from that meeting. So maybe we'll talk about some more about him next time. And then the outsourcing of government functions to our private corporations, who've become the new big brother in our Orwellian world. So thanks for sharing your thoughts today, Chris. As you saw on the screen, Church and the Libertarian. It's been published for a while, but still a classic book if you've never read it. Do look for your copy there on Amazon, and I highly recommend it. So thanks for visiting with us today, Chris.
Thank you, Brian. Until next time.
Till next time.